This is Rebuttl, presented by Extra Insights.
Hello and welcome. My name is Vikram Pratap Singh and this is Rebuttl, presented by Extra Insights. Rebuttl is a civilized debate on issues that matter for curious news consumers. Humans from time immemorial have been in the pursuit of development, which has led them to great inventions, both in the fields of science and arts. Nature has provided humans with necessary tools in their path to development. From the first wheels to complex machineries, humans have come a long way. However, in the quest for development, humans have destroyed nature. Climate change and landscape change are real threats and must be dealt in the best way possible, or the very thing that led to the development of humans could become their annihilator. This brings us to the topic of today's debate: development versus preservation. What is the way ahead for developing nations like India? Each participant gets a total of 5 minutes for opening comments, 3 minutes to rebuttal and refute, and 1 minute to share their closing comments. Speaking for preservation is the coordinator of the Heritage Debating Society and a member of Students' Council, Praveen Agrawal, winner of several debates. This champion debater will speak for preservation. Speaking for development is Sharanya Chaturvedi, chairperson of the Heritage Debating Society and a Shakespeare lover. Sharanya is a force to be reckoned with. Ladies and gentlemen, let's debate. Take it away, Praveen.
Good afternoon to one and all present here. The motion that the House has today is development versus preservation. What's the way ahead for a developing nation like India? Now, when I read this motion for the very first time, I identify the key word in this motion to be versus, right? When you say team A versus team B or side A versus side B, you essentially mean that you can either choose A or B. You essentially make that into a dichotomy. You essentially make those mutually exclusive events, and that is exactly where my problem with the motion begins, right? Because the two terms used in the motion, development and preservation, when used in the mutually exclusive sense, do not benefit humans at all. It does not matter whether we choose development or whether we choose preservation. If it is one over the other, it does not result in a healthy growth of mankind, right? Now, so what I essentially believe this debate boils down to is, do we choose development over preservation at the cost of preservation, or do we choose preservation at the cost of development? And through the course of my speeches, I would try to bring light to why choosing development over preservation is a necessary evil of society. But also, when we choose preservation, we should keep in mind that development is also a necessity to survive and evolve as human beings, right? Now, after having spoken about the dichotomy in the motion, let me talk about the very first topic that I want to talk about in preservation, right? Which is the preservation of nature, which is the preservation of ecology. None of us are unaware of the problem that climate change has brought upon us. Carbon footprints have been rising since times immemorial, since the Industrial Revolution took over, and the developed nations are at a state to avoid this by investing huge sums of money. But the developing nations are also trying to put development over ecology, to put development over nature, and that essentially is what I find problematic, right? Now, very recently, the Indian government rolled out the EIA 2020 draft, which talks about reduction in permissions, which talks about reductions in clearances, which talks about promotion of modernization and talks about promotion of industries and development at the cost of allowing violators and perpetrators to misuse this in the very long, in the essence of building the projects, right? Now, what I believe this would lead to is the already corrupt industry that the corporate people use to use these projects to acquire wealth, right? Case in point will be the Devang Valley protests, right? Now, the Devang Valley protests talk about the two dams built in the Devang Valley region of Arunachal Pradesh. This project was approved in 2015, but the local tribes have been protesting long since then, and as a result, this project has not started yet. Now, this project, when it was approved by the government, people were against it because they believed that it did not make any economic or ecological sense, because it meant destroying hectares and hectares of very rich ecological biodiversity. But the government utilized a very, very soft line when they said we will just relocate the forest, we would relocate the people, we would provide alternate means of occupation, and so on and so forth. Now, what this did was this did not deter the people from protesting the uprooting of their homes. So what this essentially led to was the powerful people labeling these protesters who were merely trying to protest their homes, to labeling them as anti-nationalists and Maoists, to propagate their project and shove it down their throats, right? And that is where I believe the problem arises. Now, in such a scenario, in a society, in a status quo where this is prevalent, I believe that the draft EIA 2020, which was recently unveiled by the government of India and was subject to tons and tons of criticism, it talks about reduction in permissions, it talks about reduction in clearances, it talks about reduction in the time given to a court to review a petition filed by a person to approve certain projects. It also talks about the reduction of various clearances that one needs to approve, and I believe this would essentially lead to the harm to the nature getting a lot of harm which it should not have, because development should not overpower preservation in any sense, right? Now, having talked about preservation of nature and ecology, the next very important thing that I would like to talk about is the preservation of values. Talking about the preservation of values, I would like to bring forth the perspective of modernization, right? We realize that modernization has led to certain developments in society, but what modernization has also done is given rise to a lot of unnecessary evils in society, right? Case in point would be the increasing, surging number of people living in old age homes, right? People believe that the old parents who are no longer being able to provide for themselves, who are proving to be some sort of a financial burden for them, they can just merely think of them as a commodity and just make them shift out of their houses, right? And this, I believe, is a fault at the very grassroots level of values in a person. And I believe that people should always preserve their values, because values is what makes a person human. And if we forget where we come from, if we forget where we originate from, if we forget what our values are, then we would never be able to become and grow into an individual that we would otherwise become, right? And the next very important thing that I would like to talk about in the aspect of preservation would be the preservation of democracy, the preservation of opposition, and the preservation of peace, right? These are one of the most burning topics that are happening right now. Case in point, the China interventions. Case in point, the China fighter planes. Case in point, the casual throwing of the World War III terms everywhere. And I believe that this is very problematic in a society which is developing, because the looming threat of war essentially means that people cannot concentrate on other things. And that is why I believe that preservation should never be taken a back seat when people want to develop. Instead, preservation should be the priority, where before they want to invest their resources in developing something or other. Thank you.
Preservation should be a priority, says Praveen, and very interesting points there from him. The question he raises is very valid. Preservation over development, or is it development over preservation? Corporates have to be more responsible. Certain clause in EIA could harm nature. So these were some very important points raised by Praveen. I will now ask Sharanya to go ahead and talk about development. Take it away, Sharanya.
Thank you, Vikram. So, allow me to quote Nehru: "A moment comes, which comes but rarely, in history, when we step out from old to new, where an age ends, and when the soul of a nation, long suppressed, finds utterance." Now, when Nehru said these words at the stroke of midnight in his Tryst with Destiny speech, I'm sure he never expected us to come up here and debate the concept of development in a developing country. I mean, listening to this topic, it made me a little puzzled, because I couldn't understand, the reason for development versus preservation. What is way ahead for a country like India? And mind you, India is a developing country. So, reading this topic, the very millennial term wherein Americans go and say, I want a mango milkshake without mango and milk. A developing country without the idea of development is the same as that, a mango milkshake without mango and milk. So breaking down the topic, I feel the purview of this debate is more than just, environment preservation, and it's not just limited to environmental sciences. There are three different layers to this topic, wherein societal, very importantly pointed out by Praveen, societal, political, and of course technical. Now, let's first come to the technical part of it. So we understand that I understand the opposition comes up and says that development at the cost of preservation, wherein we are actually wrong. So it so happens that right now we are in this stage wherein we are understanding man is developed enough to understand the harms that its previous, ongoing development has done to the environment. And to come out of those harms, man has to develop newer environmental friendly technologies. So when I talk about preservation, I am inherently talking about developing more technologies which will help me preserve the environment. So this point of choosing preservation over development falls flat on the if you come up to me and you tell me that no, however man is developed, it's okay, अब बस इतना ही और नहीं चाहिए हमें, now whatever we have, we preserve that, then that's, it's outright insipid, because imagine the same debate going on in the teenagers of Alexander Fleming. Okay, fine, it's okay, whatever development is done, that's okay. Now we don't know what penicillin is, so we don't need. So the idea of not choosing development itself is, it was contradictory to the entire humanity and the process of life, because development is a step forward and we always have to move forward. Charles Darwin has proven to us how involuntarily man moves forward. Moving on to societal values, very rightly pointed out by my opposition, how societal values in the name of development are going down. So, it is very, it's very, I don't know, it's so weird that we blame all the harms of the society to development, like something that is helping you move forward, and if you cannot, all your drawbacks, you are putting it in the name of development. So the surging number of people in old age homes have nothing to do with development. So, society will always have problems. It had problems. It had a different set of problems 10 years ago. It had a different set of problems 5 years ago. It had a different set of problems now, and it is going to have a different set of problems in future. If what you want, if what you are striving for is a society that does not have any problems, if what you think is development is causing problems, so if we do not have any, if we want a society, if we want a utopian world where there are no problems, we have to stop development, that's wrong. Okay, I agree to the fact that we, in a country like India, where our culture is so important to us, development does not equal westernization. Westernization and, adhering to the Western world, which is already developed, that is not development for our nation. Our nation development, and it's been proven that we develop keeping our culture, keeping our values, keeping what makes us Indian alive. We do not want to be the next USA. We want to be a developed India. That is what the society presently stands for, and that is what the inherent essence of development is. Moving on, society development, you can't preserve what develop to reach to the urban area. It is only the urban people who agree that, okay, women can have lives more than, the four walls of their house. The rural part of India, it still needs all kinds of development. We still don't have electricity in half of the country, almost half of the country. So how can you, ignore the fact of development? So talking about the Devang Valley project, so it's again, like you said, a coin has two sides to the story, and politicization of development has always been there. If the government does not, for example, take Bengal, if there are companies, big companies are not coming up and establishing their businesses, then the people are blaming the government because there is no development. And then there is development in some parts of the country. People who want to politicize, who want vote bank politics in the name of preservation, will obviously make it a political stance that this development is bad, all those things. So the cons, corruption is not versus development. This is not development versus corruption. I mean, those two things don't sit in the same line. Those are evils of the society, and that is abuse of the process of development. However, I think this debate is inherently about the concept of development, and it's so wonderful that we have come to a nation. We are in a nation that has not criminalized LGBTQ. Have not criminalized LGBTQ, but we need to move ahead. For example, legalization of it is still left. So that is what development is all about. I mean, there are people again who will come and say, this is not in our dharma, and this is not in our books and holy, and this is not our culture. So we must preserve our culture and prevent all these things from happening. It is wrong. Because, we have come to a day where we have established that every person deserves equality and respect. So the same thing that I'm talking about. So in the end, I would like to conclude by saying, this entire concept of choosing preservation over development or blaming the harms of the society in the name of development is inherently what is wrong with our, with this motion today. I feel development is the key, and there is no debate about, whether we should develop or not, because man will. It is in our nature to move forward. It is in our nature to become better. So I think the debate on this topic itself is debatable. And in the end, I'd like to quote Alfred Tennyson. He very famously said, "Old order changes easing place for you." Whatever he means with it is simply that newer things will come. As soon as a person is born, there are people who die. There are new policies and new school of thought that will come in the society and will remove the older part of it. And some people who are so emotional about it, who want to latch onto it, are going to blame development. But that doesn't mean that we, the millennials of today, prevent development from happening, or even, as a matter of fact, debate on the concept of development. Thank you, Vikram.
India is a developing country and it is inherent. We must develop environmental friendly machines. Rural India needs development. Some of parts of countries, they haven't yet received electricity. Also development in regards to LGBT community and culture and religion. So very important points raised by you. It's now time for rebuttals and refutes. Please take it away, Praveen.
So let me first begin by telling you what my opposition essentially did today, right? She came up and cherry picked my arguments, to which she had rebuttals, and then made her whole speech about it, right? When I talked about the EIA reducing the clearances and permissions required for a company to start a project, she clearly ignored that, because there is no rebuttal to saying that reduced clearances and reduced permissions would lead to a better and more eco-friendly world, right? Now she comes up and talks about me and accuses me of wanting to choose preservation over development, and never for one justifies how her side of the coin essentially talks about choosing development over preservation. Now, I'm very sorry to say, but fancy courts do not work in rural India either. You need to realize that the problem lies in the grassroots, and you need to realize that development at the cost of preservation, if that is going on, then those people at the rural level are the very first people who will have the short end of the stick. When a country builds a dam when a country clears up a forest and builds a dam over a valley near the forest, then the tribal people living near the forest are the ones who have to be relocated, are the ones who face occupational hazards, are the ones who lose their homes, who lose out on their jobs, who lose out on their livelihoods, who lose out on their traditions and culture for which their ancestors have been going on. So I believe that this narrative of pursuing development because rural India needs it over preservation is a very faulty one in its very essence, right? Now she comes up and talks about politicization of development and how abuse of different processes like corruption is not in the purview of today's debate. Well, I strongly disagree, because I believe that these means of abusing of the process is the very reason why we are having a discourse at all today, right? Because if there was no abuse of the process, and if we clearly take the ideal scenarios in each case, then there is no need of debating, because we both realize that development is a process that cannot be stalled. We as human beings every day grow older. We cannot stay for 19 years old for all our lives, right? This is not a movie where we grow lesser in age, like that movie, right? I forgot the name, but excuse me. So we need to realize that what I essentially tried to do in my first speech was tell you that when governments like the current Indian government tries to propagate a policy like the new environmental policy and the EIA, it essentially is choosing development many folds over the preservation of a number of things in society and in nature and democracy. And I essentially find that problematic. I not for once argued that development is not necessary and preservation should be chosen over development, right? I told that preservation is essential and should be kept in mind before you pursue development, right? Now my opposition came up and essentially made this whole debate about development and preservation being the two sides of a coin. I essentially, in my very first sentence of my very first speech, came up and told you that this is the problem with today's motion, right? I do not agree, and I will never agree to the fact that development and preservation are two sides of a coin. I can agree that they are two faces of a dice which can lie adjacent to each other, but cannot lie opposite to each other. Because if you have development and no preservation, then you are just ruining all your resources, and your country will have nothing to develop from in 5 years time. Similarly, if you are choosing preservation over development, then you will have only resources and no technology to cope up with the entire world after 5 years of time. So both are equally and severely harmful. So what we need to realize, if a country like India chooses to go on full industrial revolution mode and ignore climate change that is happening today, nobody will benefit from it. But if we take a more sensible move and look at the study conducted by the Nature Conservancy Agency in accordance with 11 other institutes like the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who have suggested that if we take a more holistic approach to this whole development versus preservation debate, if we take a more sustainable and more ecological perspective towards this whole debate of development over preservation, and not merely lie in the black and the white of the topic, we believe, as we I am glad that both sides of the house today realize the fault with the motion, right? We both realize that these are not terms that exist mutually exclusively to each other. And I fail to also believe when my opposition comes up and tells you that development is not in no way responsible for the modernization of people's thoughts, resulting in people ending up in old age homes, right? If you go back in society, say 50 years ago, people would not want to go out. Now you come up and tell me that penicillin would not have been developed. You come up and tell me that technological advances are there. So that is development, and that is the need of the hour. I'm not saying for once that we can survive without development. What I'm saying is, when you do that development, you do not implement policies like the EIA, which result in development taking a serious hit on ecology, or taking a serious hit on preservation of numerous aspects of society, including the democracy, which is completely taking a severe hit in our country right now, because our opposition, which
Absolutely.
is supposed to be the major check
Absolutely.
on
I'm
the
sure.
government.
Yes, Praveen, I'm sure you have a lot of things to say, and we'll have to actually consider the time as well.
Sure. I'll just wrap
As,
it up in my
and
last minute.
very important points raised by you. Preservation is necessary. Development has been abused more than one way. Preservation and development cannot lie opposite to each other. They have to, any country who has to develop must pursue perseverance as well as development. Both
Exactly.
are of immense importance. Great points there. I will now ask Sharanya to go ahead and continue with her rebuttals and refute. Take it away.
Thank you, Vikram. I think Praveen's earphones are not working. So in the very first minute of my speech, I came up to you and I told you how, pursuing preservation inherently is development, because, right now we are at a phase that we have realized what, the process of coming to this place has caused in the society, and how we have to develop newer technologies, reimburse those things back to the nature. So the point that the query that my opposition raised, that me taking in preservation and development as two sides to a story, I mean, it falls flat on its face, because I already said, for preservation, for you to preserve the ecosystem and the environment, you have to develop newer technologies so that they do that, because the present technologies we have, God knows, we have destroyed the land with it. So the point of environmental preservation versus development of newer technologies is tackled there, wherein I say that your environmental preservation comes under development of newer technologies. For example, electric cars. Now, we have developed electric cars to preserve nature. So that is what my inherent topic is. Now, talking about this very important thing that he pointed out about tribal people and them complaining. Now, we all know the witness is that tribal people are already, they want development. Okay, they want development. That is why we have affirmative actions. That is why we have the quota system, because these people in the present scenario, in the present society that we live in, their handicrafts are not being sold as much. They do not have a livelihood. So it is the government, and it is the government's job to come up with their solution and improve their living conditions, and give them a means to earn a living that's going to survive for them. That is why we have the affirmative action. That is why we have all these governments. We have the government breaking its bones and coming up with newer policies, so that we have other people. So we have factories from say USA and etc. come in India and set up their factories to provide jobs, because this country, you have to realize that as much as there are parts of people who want to preserve their culture at the cost of their bread and butter, that is not the majority. The majority of the country, 45% of the country, lives below poverty condition. That is, they do not get bread and butter to eat, and most of this is rural and tribal people. That is why, to uplift them, the government is coming up with newer policies, so that companies come in, open their factories, so that these people get employment. It is for their sake, and most of the society passes. So I'm not saying that opposition should not exist. Obviously, opposition is a very important key to discourse, and discourse is a very important, stepping stone for development. So all these people who come up and say that you are, by creating jobs, you are harming our culture. This is all bunch of opposition for the sake of it, because the fact is that we have to improve the economic conditions of the country. Therefore, development of job opportunities is important, and all these are not coming at the cost and development of newer technologies, so that environmental preservation and economic growth both go hand in hand. That is what development, by development we mean. You cannot leave one behind and want to go up for the other one. And thank you so much. I think that's my time, Vikram.
So I guess it's now turn for your closing comments. We are almost towards the end of the debate. So I'll ask Praveen to go ahead with his closing comments. Now remember to keep it, not to exceed the 1 minute mark. Thank you so much. Thank you. Take it away, Praveen.
So what I understood essentially from today's debate and from my opposition's 8-minute speech is that both of us essentially want the same things to happen, but just because we are on opposing sides of the house, we are trying to belittle each other. So because these are my closing comments, I would try to be more of a bigger person, and I would like to point the house in a direction that our country needs to be pointed at it today. So what I make of today's debate is that, like Sharanya very rightly said, that, like I also said in my previous speeches, that preservation and development cannot be on two sides of the coin, and cannot exist on opposite sides of the face, right? They have to coexist with each other. And whenever a person is thinking about development, he has to think about preservation of the things that affects directly by that development. And whenever a person is thinking about preserving something, he also has to realize that he has to develop the thing that he's preserving. So I believe that essentially what we as the house today have debated and sort of came to an amicable decision about is that what we need is sustainable development, right? What we need is sustainable development in the grander scheme of things, because there is no point debating whether we should have development over preservation or whether we should have preservation over development. Now, I can go on and refute Sharanya about tribal people wanting jobs at the cost of so on and so forth, but I'm not going to do that because I understand the place that she's coming from, right? I understand what she wants to convey to the house today, and because this is the last minute that I'm getting today, I just want to say that what we as house today have developed and over the course of our discourse on this very pertinent but somewhat flawed topic have come to a conclusion is that development is necessary. Preservation is also necessary. What is the need of the hour is essentially sustainable and smart development with policies that do not abuse either of them. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Praveen. Beautiful points there from you. The two must coexist together, and which will lead to real development, right? Preservation and development go hand in hand. I would now request Sharanya to go ahead with her closing comments. Thank you.
Vikram, or to be very honest, this is by far the most interesting debate I have ever been a part of, wherein the proposition and opposition essentially want the same thing and agree upon everything except for, politics in India, which is, not pertinent to the topic itself. So I think it's going to be safe to say that the house stands. Anyways, so when we talk about development and preservation, I believe that rightly said by Praveen as well, that you cannot choose one over the other. Both inherently want the same thing. Progressive, are necessary for the progress of society, and for preservation you need development, and for development you need preservation, because if we exhaust all the resources we have, then what do we develop on? Well, we have nothing to work with. We don't have raw materials then. So development inherently falls down that time. And to preserve those resources, we need to develop newer technologies. So inherently, we conclude this debate by saying that these two things have to go hand in hand for the society to develop in turn. And and in terms of societal values, we think that India by far, we have agreed on the fact that modernization and development of the country and the societal values in the school of thought of the people of the country does not equate to westernization of it. We can move forward, we can give respect, equality to our women with pertainance to the culture we have. We can give respect and equality to the LGBTQ community with respect to, the culture we've had, because inherently India has had a very rich culture which, accepts all sexualities, accepts women. It is, the cons of the society and the abuse of those literature in favor of patriarchy, which has, made this entire preservation of culture into oppression of matriarchy or oppression of the female and oppression of sexuality. So that is where we end this debate by saying development is the key, and for preservation as well, development is the key. Thank you, Vikram.
So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the close of Rebuttl. Thank you very much, Praveen and Sharanya, for joining us. It was a pleasure to hear you on Rebuttl. Our listeners can participate in the debate on our website or via the Extra Insights app. We would love to hear your rebuttals. We shall see you next week with another real debate. Thank you very much.